Good afternoon, St. Mary's. It is Thomas Lee here. Excuse the construction. There's going to be a lot of banging around, um, but uh, but yeah, as long as they don't smash my wall, I am not too concerned about it. So we are going to continue through the Sixth Commandment. So I kind of put it on break last week just because it was kind of a heavier subject. So I think it's good just to kind of separate it. Today will also be a heavy subject. The Sixth Commandment is a pretty intense one, but yeah, the church teaches, it has very clear, teachings on these certain things. So, but the most important thing is like why, right? Because if we don't understand the why, then people ask us about it. It's just like, okay, why do Catholics do this or that or the next thing? And then if we don't know, well, that really shakes our credibility as Catholics. It's like, oh, these people are just mindless and they're following, these rules, and it doesn't really make any sense. So, but it makes perfect sense. Like if you break it down, dissect it, think about it, that is why we have what we have. It's actually come up a couple times in the last couple weeks. So we're going to talk about in vitro fertilization, contraception, and impure thoughts. And Jesus mentions about impure thoughts in the scriptures. So I think it's super important that we go into that and what that means. Let's start with the first one. I always in confession, I always just start with the hardest one. So I think in vitro fertilization is definitely up there. I think that a lot of the times people kind of see it as a good, right? Like people, a husband and wife, they can't conceive on their own. So, we now have the science, we have the tools to be able to support that, right? And then usually using medical means to preserve life is acceptable. So why is it unacceptable to create life? Great question, Mr. Tom Deary. There is a couple of things that I learned. So it gets complicated because as science evolves, then theology has to answer the next questions, right? I will tell you the information that I learned was from 2 or 3 years ago, about 2 years ago. So since then, science has evolved. But what I can tell you is for in vitro fertilization, there is basically one very specific reason why it is immoral. And what the reason was is because they would have to, uh, a, in order for the procedure to take place, they would typically take multiple eggs and they would fertilize them in a petri dish, so that, or whatever they used to provide the environment which was acceptable for a sperm and an egg to create a life, right? But the problem with that was they would use multiple eggs, and in certain procedures they still do use multiple eggs, in order that the success rate is higher, right? And then they would put all those fertilized eggs into the womb of a mother, and then they would see what would happen. Okay, so the problem with that immediately is that you're fertilizing eggs as soon as conception takes place. There is a human life there. Okay, so if the chances of survival are already super low, then we can't really be performing the seizure, right? Because then we are literally bringing a life into the picture on a very risky scale, right? So if that is the case, then it immediately is off the table because we can't be taking chances with human life, right? Like we can't be. I can't to even play the game Russian roulette, even if I don't shoot myself, let's say I get lucky or whatever, that's still mortally sinful, right? We're putting our lives in unnecessary risk, and so it's the same thing. Like it can be very risky for this procedure to take place, and if an egg and a sperm, why am I blanking? I can't think of it, but when they come together, a life is formed, and if that dies, then the soul has I mean it complicates it. Then it's in the mercy of God, right? And we can kind of talk about that more later. But so the second problem with it is once the eggs are in the mother's stomach, sometimes what will happen is it's dangerous for two, especially three of them, to start forming at the same time. It's not the same as twins, right? They're two full It's two full-grown human beings or potential human beings are growing at the same time, and so it actually becomes dangerous for the mother. And what'll happen is oftentimes they'll have to eliminate one of them, so to protect the life of the mother. So it's also very risky for the mother if you're doing that, if there's multiple eggs in the mother at the same time. So yeah, so that is what I've been told. That is what I know, and it's very tricky, right? Because science is evolving, and now they can do one egg much more accurately. And I believe I have to kind of go back and that's what I've heard. That's the argument that I've heard. Maybe I can make another video on that, but it just kind of comes back to also that we're now kind of taking life into our hands, and we are responsible really for the outcome of that, whereas before we're not, right? If we're following the natural law, if a husband and a wife have a child or they have a miscarriage, that is not they're not culpable for that. But if an accident does happen during the procedure, they are culpable for it, because it goes against the teaching, and the doctor is culpable for it. And so they're also culpable for the doctor's actions there, to a degree. So yeah, so that's why it gets super complicated. But the church has a very clear reason why this is not in line with God's natural order, not in line with God's law. The second thing, which is also very challenging, is the church is teaching on contraception. Why do they teach what they teach? And this one's more simple, I think, to answer. There's actually a scientific reason, which is pretty scary, actually. And I don't have the information on it quite yet, but I will have it in a few weeks. I have to go on a mission trip, so I'm super busy. But yes. So the first reason, though, is like God, like going back to last week's video, talking about the sexual, or a couple weeks ago, the sexual union is really for a very specific purpose. It's for the two reasons: for the union of the couple, as well as the procreation of life. And so when we're open to both those things, God can, in his divine will and his providence, he can bring the life that he has planned, right? So he has planned all of us for 14 billion years, and then before that, like, we all existed in the mind of God, and he's had great desire for our arrival. He has great desire for our existence. And so when we dispute that, or when we distract that, when we put up barriers there in God's plan, I mean, think about like the impact of each of our lives is tremendous, right? So one human life has a huge impact, and God has been waiting with great love for this child who's not even born yet. I loved you, before when God was even when we were just a thought of God, he still loved us. His love for us actually creates us, right? It comes into existence. That's how strongly he loves us. So it is something to keep in mind that God has a plan. I'm not an accident. You're not an accident. And God has been waiting for us. And when we get in the way of that, when we take God's hand away from the creation of or procreation, then we set up huge barriers in God's plan. So that is one thing. The last thing, super quick, is the impure thoughts. So Jesus says, anyone who has thought in their mind, has impure thoughts in their mind, has already committed adultery. And that's a pretty intense teaching, right? Because then we even have to be aware. Now, every time an image comes into my head, is it sinful? No. And oftentimes, we have no responsibility whatsoever. It can only be sinful if we engage in it. If we start to kind of go down that trail and say, oh yeah, that would be awesome if I did X, Y, or Z, right? So that's when it becomes dangerous. If it happens and we immediately wash it away or just brush it away, then it's not our fault. We're not culpable. But the thinking is, it's if I had a wife, let's just say I was married to Susie Smith, and here I am, just kind of, even though we're sitting next to each other, and I start having all these thoughts about somebody else. What if she could see my thoughts? Like, it's not enough that I don't act on it, right? But the fact that I desire it, like, how would that impact her? Like, wouldn't she feel like a great, like she's offended? Like, this man promised loyalty to me, and he's breaking that promise, right? And so that's how God sees it. Like, she might not see it, but God sees you breaking a promise. And so, even if you're not married, I think that it is a dangerous thing, and it's considered mortally sinful, right? Because we enter into that state of adultery, even within our minds, is what Jesus says. So it is pretty intense, but that's the Catholic faith. I am not here to give you my own thoughts, right? I am not here to tell you what I think. This is what the church teaches, and have we lived it perfectly? No. Have I lived it perfectly? Absolutely not. I'm probably worse than every single person listening to this in my past life. What's the miracle? God's mercy can literally change us into saints. I know I'm changing into a saint every day just by the graces that he gives me in Holy Communion, graces that he gives me before going to the Blessed Sacrament, the Rosary, the Divine Mercy Chaplet. Like, all those are making me into a saint. And I'm going to be going from the scum of the earth, if God wills, hopefully brings me to heaven one day, to the peak of the mountain where all the greatest saints are, right? That's where we should all be striving for. And it's awesome. We can do it, not because we're awesome. Even if you were the absolute most miserable piece of dirt in the world, Jesus told St. Faustina, I can take the greatest sinner and make them the greatest saint if they trust in my mercy. And that will move mountains. That will make us become great saints. Don't worry about your past life. Don't worry about your sinfulness. Move forward with your eyes fixed on the Lord and fixed on his Sacred Heart, which it burns to forgive us. It desires to forgive us so badly that it hurts him when we don't accept it. It relieves him when we do accept it. Okay, and we will be great saints. Awesome. All right, that's it for time. Hope you guys are well, and God bless you. Peace.